Segregation is now clearly on the attack, and it's important to note that this begins really with a grassroots movement. It's not through some big government action that is yet to come. So, what are the different tactics used by this grassroots movement? And overall, it's embedded in nonviolent protests. Okay, but the different tactics underneath that are going to be some of the main ones are boycotts, freedom rides, and sit-ins. Let's start with boycotts. We'll just touch on it because we've already mentioned an example of it, the Montgomery bus boycott. Often there's an economic means behind this, like there was in Montgomery, but it's the idea of not participating in something in order to create change. The next one, the Freedom Rides. These began in 1961. We saw a group called CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, is what CORE stands for, and they set out to have a freedom ride where blacks, whites, they get on a bus and they have a ride in, they ride on that bus into the deep South. They understood that there were going to be some confrontations. Looking back, they did not realize how confrontational it would be. But the idea was to challenge the South, really challenge the South to not interrupt their integrated bus ride into the South where segregation was being upheld. Okay? And there were two buses that went, they were hoping to get down into Louisiana. Neither of those buses made it. Both came under attack. People were beaten, hospitalized, and the federal government again had to get involved. What makes it very noteworthy, though, is this became front page news in the United States, and you saw nonviolent protesters having violence taken out on them. Okay, so that's another form of nonviolent protests. A third are sit-ins. Sit-ins are where African American protesters would sit at a segregated lunch counter where it's for whites only, and they would really demand, very peacefully, demand to be served, and they weren't going to leave until they were served. They would not be served, and then eventually, if not immediately, people would start to shout slurs at them. People would dump food all over them, and oftentimes, once more, it would end with a beating, and then going into often those participating would go to jail. And one of the most famous examples of that is in Greensboro, North Carolina. And sure enough, they successfully did not challenge violently those who were violently attacking them, but they they were beaten because of it, and eventually they wound up in jail. Of course, one of the greatest things to come out of the movement, or to have a movement be as successful in some ways as the civil rights movement, you need leadership. And during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, we do have some leaders that come to the forefront and make a difference. Earlier, we talked about Rosa Parks and her responsibility in the start of the Montgomery bus boycott. Martin Luther King, we've already mentioned him by name, but here is a man who was not looking to lead a movement, but during the Montgomery bus boycott was asked to be the leader of the movement, be the leader of the boycott, and he accepted. And sure enough, he's going to become the really the outspoken leader of the civil rights movement. And not all, specifically not all African Americans, came to agree with how he handled the movement, specifically the nonviolent part, and we'll take a look at that in another video. But he definitely is the leader that's of the nonviolent protest and the idea of integration while overcoming segregation. I put JFK up there because on a national level, we see JFK actually bail his brother Robert Kennedy. He bails Martin Luther King Jr. out of jail uh, before the Nixon Kennedy election. He targets African Americans for their vote, and he receives their vote. He appears to be genuinely interested in their well-being. While there is definitely some truth to that, we never really find out how much truth there is going to be because of the assassination of JFK in 1963. I put up another name on the screen here, Jackie Robinson. Most people probably know him because he is the first African American to play in Major League Baseball. Up until the uh, mid 50s, Major League Baseball was an all-white league, and the African Americans had the Negro leagues. They were not integrated whatsoever. Jackie Robinson was the uh, first African American to be a Major League Baseball player. That is an accomplishment in and of itself, especially how he went about it. He received uh, a ton of different types of abuses, specifically verbal, but his ability to not react and not react in a way that many people that look down upon African Americans, um, he didn't react in the way that they would have expected him to react. But his legacy in the civil rights movement doesn't really end there. It starts there, and he becomes a full uh, activist. Past his playing days as well. He even is going to be in negotiations with President Eisenhower um, about how African Americans have waited longer than any other group to receive the rights. So to receive the rights that they deserve. So they shouldn't be asked upon any longer to wait for those rights. As for successes with the civil rights movement, there's no doubt about it. The fact that African Americans are leading so much of the movement is important. Um, we'll also see that the civil rights movement is going to create federal changes. I said it earlier, it's a grassroots movement. It's starting with the people, but it is going to lead to federal changes. We see during Truman's era, he's going to desegregate the army. We've talked about the repeal of Plessy v. Ferguson, and finally, the 14th and 15th Amendments, which are supposed to give rights to minorities, African Americans, 100 years earlier, they are now going to be much more realized as opposed to really writings on the wall and nothing more. Okay? The next video we'll look at is going to be about the changes in the movement, specifically the nonviolent aspect and how people get tired of having violence taken out on them. They're looking for to take a new route to finding justice. Join us next time.